Some memories cannot easily be forgotten, no matter how devastating and ugly they are. I often heard stories from several of Annette's school friends that there were allegedly male teachers interested in young girls, but maybe it was more a case of teenage girls having a crush on them. Was it nothing more than a fabrication? Sometimes one heard how certain teachers have been jailed for inappropriate behavior. Considering the news one hears these days in regard to student and teacher relationships of the unwanted kind, perhaps nothing was left for the imagination. But I was told that certain physical education teachers advised their female students against such relationships. Some girls were allegedly making use of the vulnerability of their male teachers. Unfortunately, there were students who blamed the teachers to hide their own shame. Some of her friends, sadly, had similar tendencies. Annette was very talented in telling make-believe tales, arguing them to be true. I still wonder what happened to the sweet child she used to be. She used to smile often, loved to dance, and was so wonderfully happy. What changed her into what she became? Where did we go wrong? Normally, parents with their opposing ideals could cause such an unacceptable change in a child's character. However, I am convinced that there was something else in play. Being imaginative, she was quite capable of making an elephant out of a small fly. Imagination is certainly highly desirable, especially when considering artistic endeavor. However, one needs to be cautious when defining imagination and psychosis. It needs to be noted that I am by no means judgmentally accusing anybody, but analytically observing the circumstances. When I was visited by her teachers and sometimes invited to the school, one of her teachers expressed concern about Annette not bringing any food to school for lunch. And when asked why it was so, she told the teacher that her father was having financial problems and could not afford to buy basic foods. It was embarrassing, and sadly, Annette told her form teacher that her dad would sometimes punish her for being naughty by not giving her any food. Was she perhaps confusing me with her mother? For this has never happened. The teachers were concerned, but I have always made sure they all had the best food available, had good clothing, and lived in a happy environment, so that they would develop mentally and physically, and in the process, hopefully become caring and kind people to themselves and others. Although her teachers did not believe the ugly stories they had been told, it really surprised me. One morning, after breakfast, and having prepared healthy sandwiches and fresh fruit in their lunch boxes, I decided to follow Annette from a safe distance so that she could not see me. After a period of walking towards the school, which normally took about 8 minutes, she dropped the contents of her lunchbox into a roadside rubbish container. I collected the items which were individually packed and went to the school. After meeting her form teacher and talking to her about the facts related to that incident, she told me she was personally going to talk to Annette and offer the food I took to school as if it was found by somebody else where she had accidentally dropped it. Alas, this trend went on for a while. I wondered if she was under the influence of her mother, thinking of me conjuring up bad spells with the sandwiches I prepared for her. I could not be sure, as she had very unusual characteristics, and her fabrications were almost compulsive, and was no longer a reliable individual. Whatever changed is still a puzzle for me. Has she ever changed? The teachers discovered that her father, as a sole parent, never neglected Annette as she claimed. I am sorry to say she never appreciated my parenthood, especially after being subjected to the wisdom of her school friends, who she obviously considered more intelligent and caring than her own parents. In fact, whenever I made suggestions about food or fashion, she always told me things like, "But my friend does not believe that. My friend said it could not be right. My friend would never wear something like that. My friend says she would not believe any man, because her mother—" She closed herself off completely as she matured. No one could tell her anything any more, for she had indeed become a big, all-knowing I am. Was this trend typical? What are we really teaching our children as a whole society? I might not always have been a perfect father to my children, and certainly not a perfect husband to their mother, but who is? Perhaps I was not an angel, but only human, with all my failings and hopefully some good aspects. However, I have never been as portrayed, and indeed all their poisoned darts have been continually directed at my person, as they still are. They were no longer seeing anything nice in me, blaming me for all their failings. I was rejected completely on advice given by the preachers of doomsday on their discovery of my faithlessness, as I did not follow man-made myths or cults. I was, as I still am, freed of all utopian beliefs. I choose to remain open-minded and accept everyone for who they are. I respected everybody without judging them, as I still do, but was treated as if I did not. I am forever grateful for all the gifts life has provided me with, for having life, for having great friends, a family, a wife, and wonderful children whom I never considered as my possessions, for they had their own lives to live. I worked and studied, earning some buying power, all for a wonderful life for my children and my family. I also had feelings, wishes and dreams like everybody else, for I am a human, but not evil. I was portrayed as being totally the opposite, yet I have always been a man with imagination and ambitions. I am a humanitarian, but I am not religious. Because of this, whenever I pointed at a Bible text to my wife, she always snapped at me, shouting, "Shut up, you godless, evil man! How dare you speak of God's word to me?" But I love all things. I always search for beautiful things in life. I was not evil, as I was portrayed. I'm a philosopher, always trying to see the silver lining behind the brooding dark clouds, for I know the sun always shines behind them. I never desired to exaggerate things, but accepted them as they were. I still remain the same. I do not change in my resolve. I certainly did not come to earth to follow fanaticism of any kind. Rather, freely expressing myself, inventive and creative, colorful and happy, amicable and approachable, but never someone who would break all moral codes as I was painted. I preferred not to brag about myself then as now, but acknowledge my place in the world. I was not egotistical and did not consider my own interests above everything else, although deep inside I was still a child, but not immature, for I was forced to grow up very quickly, almost bypassing my childhood. I developed various interests over the years. I was interested in learning languages, for I wanted to be able to communicate with people. I was interested to get to know all about the wonderful human species, no matter what color, race, lingual background, or belief system. I have always seen myself as a friend to humanity, and want to remain like that. Certainly, I am not evil. I have always been interested in history, science, and mathematics, for I enjoy thinking. I have always been interested in the health of everybody around me. I am interested in a brilliant human mind, with the aim of discovering the processes of thought, and be helpful to people with their conflicts and confusions, assisting them to eliminate their fears and worries, encouraging them to live happier lives. If for some reason they could not do so due to their upbringing or beliefs, I would never cease assisting them. I would never force my beliefs onto others, and certainly never hypnotize them to do things contrary to their nature. I prefer to respect everyone's free will. I am not evil, as I was portrayed by the ill-informed and self-righteous. I tried all kinds of things, discovering that if we had the will, all of us could do almost anything. I always endeavored to encourage everybody never to give up, but always be on the move with patience, never dwelling on their past failings, for we are all human. Yet I was forever painted as evil by those who could not see anything good in others, only evil. I discovered that some people, supposedly my friends, were of a different persuasion, presented themselves as the only witnesses to a great God's unending love. On the surface, they were desirous for good things to happen to others, supposedly without judging one another, as was done by the so-called churches of God ages ago, condemning one another to eternal damnation. Yet they regarded themselves as being the only recipients of eternal life. I am convinced that their philosophy was invented by some self-made ministers to convince them to accept and be led. Personally, I prefer complete freedom in thought, imagination, and inventiveness. Yet despite my own failings and successes, I resolved to do better next time. Alas, I discovered that there were no next times with certain aspects of our lives. Therefore, instead of thinking in terms of it could have been, and carrying the load of our bitter memories for the rest of our lives, I aim to look at different horizons courageously. It is certainly better to start something new, never believing and accepting that it might be too late. This lowest act of my portrayal by people of dogma was for the purpose of punishing me, or perhaps even teaching me a lesson about their God being just. It was also a definite expression in considering me as worthless and useless garbage, amongst many other things, just the same as Magda regarded my memorabilia. In reality, it was geared to destroy what was beautiful, my family, my lifelong companion, who was my friend, and my children's lives, by effectively twisting their minds against me, so that they would continue with their newfound traditions and trends to hate me wholeheartedly for the rest of their lives. Instead, I refused to bend like they wanted me to, holding fast to my democratic right to be me, without harm to anyone, for we, as humans, are free agents, freely roaming the cosmos, and therefore our lives must be like a freedom song. Those so-called friends were people who would delight in kicking a falling man, and never offer a helping hand. They were those who forever condemned everybody in the world, no matter where their devotion had led them. Even people and organizations performing charitable deeds for many others were viewed in the same light. That was not my world. I was mistaken by believing in those who despised and rejected me, truly destroying my family in the name of their God. Sadly, they kept claiming to be my righteous friends. They proved themselves to support the real criminals in case they repented their evil deeds, accepting them as if nothing had happened, and yet shunning those whom they disfellowshipped for their greatest sin of questioning the Spirit. They, the Jehovah's Witnesses, consider a murderer or pedophile and a person questioning the Spirit, as they interpret in their own biased ways of thinking, as equal in sinning. Where is the logic in this? And where the righteousness? However, when considering Annette's claims that her father had been neglecting her, whereas her school principal and teachers knew that it was not so, I must include that I never said anything about it to her, and behaved as if nothing had happened. Despite her attitude towards me and her dislike of the food I prepared, I kept following her, picking up the lunch items I had deliberately placed in special packaging from where she was dumping them every morning, and taking them to the school without her knowledge. It was becoming an interesting game as I kept collecting those packages and fresh fruit. One morning, however, an elderly woman passing by asked me if I was so desperate for food that I had to dig into the roadside bins. It was embarrassing, and I felt the need to tell her the reason. Later I discovered that Annette's teachers had also noticed that she was losing weight fast, telling everyone she was undernourished and not looked after. Whenever I heard others speak like that, I felt more depressed, for I never neglected her, and her health was vitally important to me. I was not sure about her sister Birgit. She was a very quiet one when home, but kept being very active when at school. However, she was not as thin as her sister. It appeared as if she had a better understanding of me than Annette and her mother. I was seeing my son very rarely while his mother was trying to completely alienate and distance him from me. Was that not evil? I know for a fact that because all Jehovah's Witnesses shunned me, Magda, Jehovah's faithful servant, could not do any less. That was the reason she always avoided talking to me, answering my questions in regard to the children with silence. Could she at all understand that she was being led to believe in a fantasized idea created by those who wanted to own her? On the other hand, Birgit was telling me over and over that their mother often told them never to mention the name of that evil man, encouraging them to think of him as if he was dead and buried. Whenever Birgit told her mother, "But I still love my dad," she would answer her with, "You are all like him. Then just go and stay with him. You will see what happens." One morning I collected Annette's lunch from the nearby bin, as usual, and went to the school to meet her form teacher and principal during a lunch break for a chat. They were going to invite Annette to the principal's office. When she saw me, I could see how outraged, bewildered, and anger-filled she was. I told her I found her lunch where she had lost it. As she grabbed her lunch, the principal told her that she could at least thank her father. And as she walked towards the door, one could hear her very softly saying, "Thanks." This scenario reminded me how her mother treated me when we were living in Germany. In the late afternoon, when Annette came home, as one might have expected, throwing her school bag into one corner and kicking her runners on the other, she went to her room and kept silent for a while. Not hearing a sound for some time, I went to ask her what she would like to eat. She again sulked and shouted, calling me a fucking bastard, and added, "You have embarrassed me yet again. I don't even want to go back to that fucking school." I took her bag and shoes to her bedroom and said nothing. She continued to name me with her personalized words for a long time. I could not understand her any more, and was really starting to worry about having her sole custody. On one side, I was worrying about my own health problems, my current employment situation due to a number of political issues, and on the other, what my wonderful daughters were encouraged to do to break away from me. I believe that when, as an infant, her German grandparents encouraged her to be utterly fearful of me, snatching her from my arms every time I was holding her, or changing her nappies, had a detrimental effect on her psyche. Later, as she matured as a young child, the Jehovah's Witnesses, through auspices of her mother, made sure that she turned against all evil in the world by turning against her father, who they had disfellowshipped due to his disobedience to the Spirit. Sometimes directly, and at times discreetly, they forced Magda, their faithful sister and servant, to break away from me, the unbeliever. However, they still insist that they did not. They knew how to manipulate and alter Magda's mind well, due to their knowledge of her extreme naivety. My children were constantly bombarded with subtle encouragements to hate their father, whether it was obvious to their mother or not. All their spiritual work, which has lasted until now, was beginning to pay dividends during Annette's teenage years. Now she was also subject to peer pressure from her close friends, even several teenage boys, which was having a very strong effect on her personality. She used to regularly ask me if I would let her invite her boyfriends to our home, where they could all sleep together in her room. That was frighteningly untenable. I was aware of her desire to get to know her own self and discover about the opposite gender, but her sexuality seemed to overpower her entire thoughts. She obviously could not talk to her mother in regard to her womanhood concerns, as it was not available. Magda was certainly not desirous to talk about the important questions from a growing young girl. Annette could not comfortably talk to me of her concerns in regard to the inner feelings she was becoming aware of when in the presence of boys. The information I could provide her with could only be dependent on my indirect knowledge of human development, as I never experienced how a woman would feel. But Magda insisted that the girls should ask their father about their innermost emotions. "Go and ask your dad. He has your custody." By observing of other teenage girls, I believe that the girls would feel more comfortable talking about their bodies with their mother. On the other hand, I could not accommodate any of her friends at my place due to principles I respected, whether she liked it or not. I did not feel comfortable with the idea of having teenage boys sleeping with her under my roof. She took my wishes and principles as hindrance for her being happy and having fun. She often called me a bloody bastard, and told me that I never wanted her to be happy. I would never lower myself by responding to her other than keeping quiet. I found that silence was the best reaction I could provide her with. Obviously, she was taking some of her school friends' wisdom very seriously about how she should live without any parental input, freely, wherever she could be housed, and be looked after when she needed welfare and health care. No doubt a number of boys promised her the world, and she only heeded the advice of her peers on how to be happy. After some while, perhaps also being advised by her friends that she should stay with her father a little longer for financial reasons and comfort, she appeared to calm down a little. One day she shocked me by asking if she had a baby, would I look after it? Alas, I found it very hard to wipe off these uniquely shocking memories. On one side, she behaved as if she could drown me in a drop of water in her uncontrolled anger, and on the other, asked me to look after her baby if she had one. What a confusion it was! I mentioned that perhaps her mother would like to care for her baby if she had one, and she should ask her. What she asked me explained a lot more about her lifestyle, making me feel helpless. She admired people living free with anybody they chose and changing their partners often, and spoke about it very candidly as if needing to teach me. I often wondered what she was on. Magda's attitude could be interpreted as if I, the unbeliever, chose that lifestyle normally as many witnesses and their loving sister would expect of people like me. Several witnesses who did not know me and met me later spoke to me along those lines without realizing I was no longer accepted by their other brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, teenage pregnancies were becoming an epidemic. When I was finally able to communicate with their mother, at least in this instance, she was in agreement with me for once, although avoided eye contact, talking into the air. However, I believe that she had been advised to try to communicate with me, in case I might be saved from the clutches of the devil. When some time ago I made suggestion that maybe we could try getting back together for a short while, but if it did not work, we could go our separate ways again, without any heartbreak or blame. As mentioned, she had to consult with her faithful brothers first, and if they agreed, she was going to let me know. The family court accepted our proposal for a trial period, and Magda moved into my Elwood address, but immediately began complaining about how small the unit was, without giving me a chance to tell her what I was planning. She said she was not interested in materialism, and that was her final word. A week later, she was yet again interrogating me about this and the other girl. She had changed significantly, for she was not a very happy woman, presenting a persona of being enslaved to a lifestyle forced upon her by the cult. Even physically she looked different. For instance, she plucked her eyebrows into thin lines as it was in the 1940s, but it did not suit her. In reality, it made her look like a witch. If I had a magic wand, I would probably change her looks immediately. However, it was her choice, and I was not going to make any comment about it. The girl I once loved had beautiful eyebrows, but this face I was gazing upon declared that she was no longer the girl I used to know. A short time later, she was complaining that she did not feel free to worship God by going house to house, preaching, or visiting kingdom halls with the children, as they never wanted to go to those places any more. They appeared to experience satiety. If we were to live as a family again, I decided to surprise her with our own home, which was going to be large enough and hopefully to her liking. Our young son and daughters would have their own bedrooms, and she would have a separate room if she preferred. The court removed the original decision for our access period, and we were to have joint custody of our children as before. But Annette was of an age where she had the right to choose which parent she wanted to stay with or live elsewhere. Hopefully, she would have the wisdom to choose the right path. However, Magda's absolute intention was exactly as the Jehovah's Witnesses wished her to do, to raise her children as she was dictated, bypassing the young one's desires and ignoring me completely. I have seen people from different backgrounds, race, and religious identities, and they were happy as family units despite all their differences. But I had the distinct feeling that it would be very difficult for us, as we had lived apart for such a long time. Furthermore, she would never change her resolve, and I could not be persuaded to accept an elusive God who is ever ready to destroy the world. I could perhaps keep enduring and tolerating, but my heart was no longer willing to live the rest of our lives in restrictions inflicted upon us by a man-made religious belief system, although I never opposed anybody. I made mention of my health-related concerns, and that several biopsies indicated I might develop a form of cancer over the years, and that I had to keep a watchful eye for any developments. Interestingly, Magda did not pay any heed to what I had said, as if I was telling lies. She was obviously adamant to believe nothing I explained. I was expected to be an unfaithful, untruthful person, like the rest of the world. Deep down, I did not want to continue with this arrangement. If we could at all live together, how long would it last without any hurt? It was anybody's guess. Soon after, Magda moved to an address close by, complaining that my place was too small. Although we both seemingly agreed that we would share the welfare and health expenses of the children, access to them would remain open-ended. In other words, if the children wanted to stay with either parent, they were free to do so. The girls were not happy about me letting their mother stay with us, and chose to live with me perhaps because they could celebrate birthdays and Christmas more freely. I had the very distinct feeling that both our daughters felt betrayed by their father for allowing the restrictive parent to move in, even for that very short period of time. Considering the circumstances, I personally thought it to be a healthier arrangement, yet I was unsure about Magda's new trend for desiring to stay at our place for that very short time. I felt she had a distinct plan and ulterior motive. However, my observations in relation to Annette's behavior did not look promising. Even then, Magda hardly ever allowed Claude to come near me. The girls did not like being lectured forever about everything they wanted to do, and were forced to listen to her forever complaints about their father being an untrustworthy person for not recognizing the truth. Apparently she was still preaching to the children for hours why it was better for them to stay with her, because she was doing the right thing as a parent, for she adhered to the truth of witnesses. She was most certainly using psychological methods to convince them that they would be better off if they separated from their father permanently, and the girls began behaving very coldly, treating me as if I was doing everything wrong and telling untruths all the time. It became more and more obvious as time went by that we were experiencing communication breakdown. Annette named me anew an unreliable and unbelievable man. Before we began that trial period, she declared that she could not trust me if I allowed her mother to stay with us and yet, strangely, she was unbelievably friendly towards her. I was also informed by several teachers that Birgit was suspected of stealing from the local newsagent and school. At first, I could not believe it, but the police were involved. I questioned her, explaining that there was no need to do something like that. I suppose she was emulating some of her friends. Later I heard them arguing over this issue, and when listening to my secretly recorded tapes, I discovered that I was not meant to know about their ungainly activities, including the police warnings they were both subjected to. This was yet another matter of concern, which greatly saddened me. It looked as if they were in competition with each other, for Annette had the tendency to challenge her sister at every opportunity. Following my surprise recordings, I discovered Birgit crying after Annette told her that no boys would like her, as she was an ugly girl and simple. Children can be very cruel indeed, and Annette delighted in hurting with words, as this was also her natural behavior. Many times, discovering my sadness, although I always tried to show no such emotions, Birgit asked her sister why she hurt Daddy again. Annette usually shrugged her shoulders and muttered, "I don't know." Some time ago, I bought a cassette tape recorder with a radio for Birgit's birthday, and she was extremely happy about it. A great joy was streaming from her. I too felt as happy for this wonderful child, who was evidently very joyful. Her beautiful eyes expressed her excitement under her well-defined eyebrows, and for a young child she looked very charming and very photogenic. I felt I had to paint her portrait in oils, or draw her image in pencils, like my other works of art. Her childhood innocence needed to be captured, and in a sense eternalized. She happily started to record her favorite songs and contemporary tunes. In fact, I still have one of her cassette recordings. Unfortunately, she had the tendency to record another song before the previous one had finished, without any pause in between. However, it was her handiwork, and that was valued. She was enjoying her new toy, and often sang with it. I recently discovered her recording of me playing the keyboards. I wondered if she had listened to them at all. All her schoolwork, assignments, paintings, and carvings, as well as her diary, have been kept safe with me. I have saved all my children's school memorabilia proudly. Unfortunately, I do not have much of clothes, for his mother kept him away, and I am convinced that she did not value nor save any of his memories, probably discarding them as garbage. However, every time I looked at this memorabilia, like their photographs and sound recordings, all the memory is once more refreshed, and everything sad or happy is recalled. I kept all their images, the same as their mother's photos, film recordings, and Birgit's handwritten notes. One day Birgit brought home a large Kiss poster displaying her favorite artists in the heavy metal scene, and stuck it on the wall. When I removed it, I told her that it would be better if we framed it, but she was very unhappy about me removing it, for I was sure that she did not understand me at the time. Nevertheless, I framed it, but never had a chance to give it to her. Maybe one day, when and if I ever see her, I might pass it on to her. However, I was not sure how she had come by it. Did she buy it from her pocket money, or was it stolen? Annette told me that she took it from one of the shops and walked off with it. But since Annette had the habit of telling imagined stories, it was not easy to believe her. Even some years ago, when a police officer brought Annette home from a camping trip with the school, she exclaimed that everybody was telling lies about her, stealing small items from a souvenir shop, and even the police were apparently lying. They were her childhood adventures, but I would feel happier if she did not steal anything under all that peer pressure. I feel the need to explain minor details of this next memory. One day, Annette came home with an idea suggested by the teachers that students get some work experience over the school holidays. Soon, they were to complete their high school education, and if successful, were going to be eligible for higher education, possibly study at a university. She was among those who preferred not to continue, and therefore was encouraged to consider an apprenticeship towards employment. She even mentioned about some of her friends wanting to go into the escort service. However, before the term was over, she was recommended to undertake work experience and prepare a report about it as one of her assignments. She insistently wanted to get a job as an escort, but since she loved McDonald's food so much, I suggested that maybe we should consider such an experience during the next 2 weeks at their local branch in Glenhuntly Road, and she appeared happy about it. I contacted the restaurant's manager regarding the school assignment, and they were happy to employ Annette for a short period of time. The following morning I took her to the restaurant and introduced her to the staff. After her first day, she felt very tired, but reasonably happy. At end of the week, she complained that I was a slave driver, making her work. She said she hated work, and quoted what her friends suggested. There are easier ways to make money. The following week, she wanted to take more time for herself. This experience was to give the students a taste of what work could be like, hopefully assisting them towards independent living. A few weeks later, she was still accusing me, wanting her to become my slave. It was never my intention, and if she could earn money from this, it would remain completely hers. She obviously felt the need to accuse someone, and I happened to be an easy target. What had happened to the once upon a time, often smiling, happy child she used to be? I could no longer explain anything to her. She kept shouting at me with her ugly expletives, and accusing me that I must have felt really happy when she worked so hard, like a slave. This was very hurtful, and yet I declined to say anything. Birgit kept repeating herself, "But Annette, you're hurting Daddy," upon which Annette always shrugged her shoulders and uttered one single word, "So?" She often loudly told Birgit about how much she hated her dad. I'm still hoping that one day they will all understand how much hurt it caused. This was a time when my own health was scaring me, developing infections, blockages, and experiencing pain with the inability to pass water at ease. I was devastated. This also brings some other memories to the fore. In fact, I wished that those events never happened, but they did. When I was staying at the Boy Morris address of another friend who was managing the Natura stores in Melbourne a long while ago, Annette was literally and cunningly abducted by so-called friends who had invited us to their country estate, where they wanted me to remain and teach their children art. However, as mentioned elsewhere, I needed to go for my hospital appointment. Annette insisted on staying with her new friend, who was about her own age, and their daughter, just for another day as a school holiday treat. When I returned to pick her up, there was no sign of anybody, and panicking, I contacted the police. Those so-called friends belonged to yet another cult, although calling themselves the Children of God, and sometimes the Family. I was unsure whether they were telling me the truth. They were also members of the Victorian Spiritualist Union and close friends with Lucy Verstegen, who used to play the piano during their hymn-singing at their Sunday services. When the child was found, she was at her mother's flat in one of the western suburbs of Melbourne. Those cult members in country Victoria had also utilized a form of brainwashing, a form of hypnosis, or even drugs could be considered. Repeating myself, I'm not accusing or blaming others, only observing the peculiar circumstances. However, the discovery of them being ex-Jehovah's Witnesses was a concern, although I cannot vouch how true this information was. During the police search for Annette, I was shattered. When she was found and we met at the court, she was showing signs of extreme fear, resenting me as she had been conditioned to. It was like the icing on the top. I still wonder whether this had anything to do with her behavior during her last days with me. Going forward in time, during our final days in Elwood, one evening after supper, relaxing and listening to classics, Annette stood in front of me in the lounge room, followed by Birgit, who was telling her sister not to say anything like that to Dad. At first, I thought they wanted me to show them the accidentally taking photographs of her with one of her boyfriends, when extraordinarily close to each other, as if they were preparing to make love in front of the house, and which Birgit discovered. Originally experimenting with my new long lens, I was intent on capturing images from a distance to test the optical capabilities of my camera. I still keep them as her memories. I had no chance to show them anything, because Annette had yet another of her shocking tantrums. Frankly, I was very fearful of her, for she was quite capable of creating colorful scenarios. Who knows, maybe she was planning to try and offer me one of her special coffees again. One could not even begin to guess what she had been dreaming. She had never been like that before, when I normally took her pictures. She was very happy, whereas her current attitude towards me was nothing short of pure hatred. She put her hands on her hips, standing in front of me, loudly exclaiming, "Dad, Dad, do you know I can get you put behind the bars?" I was shocked and speechless. She raised her voice and repeated her words again. I could not believe my ears. I thought I was not hearing it right. Could not even ask her why she suggested something like that. But she answered my silent question nevertheless. "Do you know how?" she asked with an evil grin on her face. "It is so easy." And so saying left the room in haste. What had she been imagining? What evil had I done to deserve her hatred? Birgit stood next to my chair, as if wanting to comfort me, yet I might have been wrong thinking like this. She said, "Annette was talking about this for some time now, Dad. I asked her to tell you what she was telling me, if she had the guts. I asked her why my own daughter, who I cared for, could think something like that. And in answer she said, 'She hates you, Dad. She really hates you. She said you don't care for her. She thinks you are a slave driver.'" Hearing her sister telling me things like that, Annette shouted from her room, "I hate you too, Birgit. I hate you for telling that man what I told you." I now knew that I had lost my daughter for good. I knew that my daughter was only capable of hating everybody as per her natural tendencies. Was it not the same with her beloved mother? Who knows what she had been conditioned into? Was it the side effect of the hallucinogens she was given by her friends? I could not imagine Magda being so wicked as to tell her such ugly things about me, although she hated me thoroughly, without naming it as hate. Remember, hatred was their love. I also knew that some of Annette's school friends talked degradingly about their parents. Besides, it was fashionable for teenagers to do so. Parents were so ignoramus and stupid, were they not? Annette always wanted to be the most important individual, telling her friends that she had the same experiences as them without it being so. For instance, when friends said that their father was promoted, she immediately told them that her father was also promoted, without it being true. If someone spoke of their mother having cooked a nice dinner, she would immediately declare the same. She never wanted to appear any less than her peers. However, if some of her friends exclaimed something like, "You can never trust men," she had to accept it as her reality. This was a trend she shared with her mother. After years of associating with Magda as husband and wife, I can safely say this is the absolute truth. Taking this into account, I thought that perhaps Annette was reflecting what her friends were feeding her with when she made such a suggestion, asking me if I knew how she could have me put behind bars. I heard Birgit ask her how she was intending to do that, and in answer she shouted at me exactly what she told her sister. "You will see." From then on, Annette's eyes were full of hatred towards me. They were like hot coals, directed at my person. In fact, I felt she literally wanted to kill me. Strangely enough, I had a very distinct feeling about it. Obviously, she was extraordinarily angry and disappointed with me for letting her work at McDonald's for a few days, and for not allowing her to sleep with a number of boys. Annette was hardly talking to me now, and most of her stories were relayed to me via Birgit. She was using her sister as a go-between. It looked so familiar, and regrettably I had experienced it aforetimes. On the other hand, in regard to her previous inquiry, I told her that if she had a baby, she had to be responsible for the child. Besides, it was too early for her to think along those lines, and perhaps she should talk to her mother about it first. I had a feeling that she had lost a fetus recently at a very early stage of its development, but I might be wrong. I knew for certain that some of her friends had similar experiences, but I was not meant to know. Remember, men are meant to be very thick, and parents in particular would never understand a thing. Was I wrong thinking this way? I sincerely hoped that I was. It was exceedingly painful to hear her claim that I was using her like a slave. I could never understand this attitude, for I never forced her to do anything against her will. I have never forced her to work and give me any single cent she earned. In fact, I have never asked her to pay me anything, although some parents expected their daughters and sons to pay something towards their upkeep. I always preferred to be gentle with them, for I loved my children, and they were my world. Obviously, I was never appreciated. I sincerely believed her absolute hatred towards me was because I had not allowed her boyfriends to stay overnight in her bed, or her wish to do escort service for work experience, as some of her friends suggested. She was heavily influenced by the constant bombardment of me being evil due to being disfellowshipped. She kept active life behind closed doors. That is, if I had not been fed with lots of lies. At one of those rare opportunities, I asked her why she wanted me to go behind bars, and what good would it do to her. She always answered me with, "Because," while shrugging her shoulders, and I could not get any other word from her. Birgit would often finish her sentences with, "Annette hates you, Dad?" When I asked her why she hated me so much, and what wrong did I do to deserve her hatred, she habitually shrugged her shoulders, repeating, "You'll see." In a different time frame, one heard Birgit tell her sister, "Because all your friends hate their dads, you just want to hate your dad too, Annette?" As usual, Annette answered her with, "So?" One asks why her friends hated their fathers. Perhaps she was fantasizing that all her friends hated their fathers because they were men who were, as usual, portrayed as being incapable of doing anything right, unintelligent, uneducated, and unsophisticated people. Although one or two of her friends had complained about their dads not being very nice people, but did they by any chance know what was wrong with them? If they were divorced, perhaps their mothers were unhappy with their husbands, complaining how badly they were treated. And unfortunately, we have heard so many stories like that. But it did not mean that they were all terrible people. What if it was because her special friends were not allowed to have their own way? Annette could not be any less than them, could she? She too had to suffer the same as her friends. It was quite clearly the in thing. I wished she would grow out of it and be awakened from her hypnotic trance, which was adversely affecting her, making her fantasize things, but I still loved her as my daughter. Her mother's forever complaints about her father, the unfaithful liar, had a strong impact on Annette's consciousness. All her father's sacrifices to make a broken family unit work were now forgotten, for her freshly conditioned mind always had to be right. Everybody spoke against their fathers, and although she exclaimed how much she hated her mother, she was unconsciously conditioned that her mother spoke only the truth, for, as a Jehovah's Witness, she could never lie. The witnesses always presented themselves as ambassadors of the only truth, and therefore their mother had to be right at all times. Annette was bombarded from every conceivable corner to hate her father, and, in truth, it was like biting off the hand which fed her. I could not blame the poor girl, because from a very young age she was encouraged to turn against me at every opportunity. It was fashionable for the young to hate their parents, and so what else could one expect her to do? She needed to hate someone, and it had to be me, for not fulfilling her dreams. I cannot forget her attempts to reward me by adding those special ingredients, particularly after her abduction by those supporters of Jehovah's Witnesses who conditioned her young mind to their own framework of righteousness, and there was enough evidence to prove it. After she was taken to Magda, her abductors claimed it was far better for Annette to stay with her mother without knowing the reality of things. In their small minds, they were punishing me for not accepting their offer to join their circle. Magda was so thankful to her God Jehovah for bringing her daughter back after her abduction all that time ago, so that the child could be disciplined in accordance with Bible principles as they interpreted. Alas, my medical appointment at the hospital was seen as an evil thing on my part, and they claimed I could have left it to another time. But medically I needed to have those treatments no matter what those so-called friends thought. I was not going to make any apologies for that. Under those circumstances, my panicking and contacting the police was a very natural thing to do, as expected of any caring parent. I remember how that red-bearded man with a shotgun threatened the detectives I went with. They were also going to keep the large speakers I once built, which they wanted to audition. Eventually, they were returned to me. It was all because my loving daughter demanded to stay with her friend when I had to attend my medical appointment. As the whole story was reported in the media, we became famous. A month and a half later, when Annette was discovered displaying her disgust towards me at the court hearing when being returned back to my custody, she was never the same. I can still see how she buried her snotty nose in her mother's skirt, while occasionally looking in my direction extremely anxiously and fearfully, making me feel completely rejected. Later it was confirmed that the cult to which her abductors belonged have been utilizing mind transformation techniques. In other words, a specifically formulated hypnosis to make children do their bidding, where adults and children share equal relationships with each other. I mentioned a little of this elsewhere. Who knows what she had been influenced with? I deeply regretted accepting that invitation and my undermined trust in those so-called friends. Was it perhaps so organized all along by Magda's beloved brothers and sisters to get the child away from me? Even today, it remains an enigma. What a huge change it was with Annette since the days of her being a very amicable and sweet young child. Now, what she presented was an intolerable degree of complete hatred. What had the world done to her that she became so resentful about everything? What indeed did I do wrong to cause her current bitterness? It seemed I had caused much harm to her by her alleged standards and stopping those boyfriends from spending the night with her, which she interpreted as if I did not care for her well-being. I knew that if I let her stay with her mother from this point on, it might have been far better for all parties, but the girl was full of fabrications in regard to her mother, although in reality she preferred her mother above everything else, and I was the everlasting foreigner. By unbiased observation alone, one can clearly see that she never accepted nor ever appreciated me, as she was completely void of understanding, but always ready to accuse everybody around her with the ugliest things one could imagine. Ever since her infant years, she often emphasized whatever she dreamt as being true, while I felt obliged to appear to agree with her unreal dreams, where appropriate, in order to help her feel happy. She loved telling made-up stories, believing it made her appear interesting to her friends. In other words, there was a disorder which I hoped she would grow out of. Long before she became a hateful teenage girl, she used to come with me when I visited friends in the city. Some of those good friends were Polish migrants who had a bistro opposite the museum and central library on Swanston Street, which they called Museo Bistro. I painted their baby boy's portrait in a contemporary style, and they were thrilled beyond words. They were very friendly with Annette, and she received many gifts from them in the form of food. Her favorites were, of course, chocolates and the like, but after they moved to Sydney, we lost contact. I hope they are still happy after all these years. What else could one expect from my daughters, I wondered. When I thought back about what Annette told me in regard to her desire to get me put behind bars, it ran chills along my spine. I felt frozen and saddened, not knowing how to react, let alone how to deal with it. Although at the time I thought that this was a passing trend, the worst was yet to come, because as far as one could observe, nothing better could be expected from then on. Annette continued to display her complete hatred towards me, and I could no longer communicate with her for a very long while. It seemed that she was determined to destroy my life completely in respect to her mother's wishes. Indeed, what Magda had been praying for many months was now becoming the dreaded reality through her beloved daughter. If she knew what had been experienced, would she advise her daughter how not to behave, or would she perhaps feel triumphant? Unfortunately, her favorite daughter, Birgit, openly displayed characteristics influenced by seemingly Bible principles, but I pretended not to notice. Occasionally I heard Annette utter words like, "I wish he was not my father," or "I wish he was dead." I also heard her say, "I know he is not my real dad," and "I'm sure he is not related to me. I cannot be his daughter." One can guess how it made me feel. I had the very distinct feeling that she was advised to do something nasty and get away with it because of her young age. What harm was she planning to do in her extremely naive mind? I believe even Birgit was knowledgeable of this. Frankly, I was constantly on edge, thinking that they would commit themselves to do the unthinkable while I slept, causing me many sleepless nights for a long time. From then on, I decided to change my life for good, and for the better. The very best thing for me was to put aside all my memoirs in regard to a dreamt-of family, my parenthood, and raising happy children, burying them in the past, never to consider any of them again. And yet, I was not going to destroy the memorabilia they left behind. I felt the need to write my entire story for all to read and hopefully understand what life circumstances exist in the human world. Alas, this became my own wretched story of life. Due to being subjected to enormous stress levels, as well as other genetic considerations, my health began to suffer more. I developed mild duodenal ulcers and had barium meal tests, among other minor medical concerns, but was determined to heal my condition quickly, whilst also putting up with a small hernia in the groin area, needing to be under observation, and thought I was breaking to pieces. Several treatments later, I was free from such medical traumas, but as if I had not enough problems, I endured further inflammations with my urinary system, and it started to worry me even more. Was it something I needed to experience for whatever reason? I am convinced that Magda and her associates would consider it as their prayers being answered, and their God punishing me for my grave sins. That was a genetic disorder I had never been completely aware of. Several tests later, it was diagnosed that this could be the precursor towards possible prostate cancer, and was advised to keep an eye on this. One can imagine how it felt, and the stress levels I was enduring might have contributed to my ill health. My daughter's behavior made my everyday existence very traumatic. I could help myself with a positive attitude, and by supplementing my dieting, admittedly, I became even more health conscious and decided to add saw palmetto into my food. And soon the results started to appear promising, yet several specialists advised me to keep an eye on my prostate, and if there were any changes present in my PSA levels and frequent inflammations, to consider yearly tests. That all sounded positive, and I was more relaxed about the whole issue. In truth, I felt a little embarrassed to talk about it to any of my friends or my now ex-wife, who would completely ignore it. As far as she was concerned, I was righteously forced to feel worth nothing. I suffered in silence. Under all those circumstances, very hard to cope with Annette's behavior and her tendency towards a multi-personality complex. Imagine, for example, the way she was so willing to see me put behind bars. I was worried in the extreme, asking in my mind, what had I done to deserve such treatment? What had I neglected? Or what pain had I caused? When my children had everything they needed, and their health and well-being, their mental and emotional needs always considered above everything else, even neglecting my own health just to look after them, I was happy. I certainly was not ready for this kind of behavior. Was it perhaps part and parcel of a young human's growth? Was it something that I missed during my studies? I wished I could easily discard this morbid state of things, but how could one simply ignore all that and maintain a positive outlook? Clearly, I was not going to stop her getting to know boys, for it was her experience and choice. I did not own her. Out of the blue, she even told me that I could never stop her living her life as she wanted. As a parent, I could only try to teach her what was right and what was not. In reality, we can only teach them about the ideal things we are cognizant of, but we can never live our lives through them. They have their own lives to live. However, I did not desire her to experience pregnancy issues at that tender age. I could not talk about it in the same way as her mother needed to, but I did not have any real communication with Magda under the cultist restrictions she was obliged to follow. As soon as I had any suggestion, even before my alleged disfellowshipment, she presented complete opposition towards me, often asking, "How would you know? You are not a woman." That was it. Now it was Annette's turn to keep going with the tradition towards me, and whenever I attempted to advise her about things, she would also turn herself off, listening to nothing, instead making comparisons with what her classmates were saying. Their words carried more weight than mine. There was no need to prove the validity of the following wisdom: an apple does not fall far from its tree. It was exactly the same with her mother, and I was as good as nothing. I believed that mothers would usually talk to their daughters about intimate issues they should know, but Magda had the propensity of telling them to ask their father, for he had the custody. She was bent with the idea of the end times and the bad morals of the world, without considering her daughter's emotional needs as young adventurers in life. They were always advised to go and ask their father, although certain things could be better explained to them from a woman's point of view. She only felt the need to talk to them when preaching about the wicked world and Jehovah's kingdom. Magda, obviously under the influence of her brothers and sisters, would not have a bar of it when there was need to explain to them important issues relating to their person. Oddly, however, Annette's school friends used to say things like, "You are a lucky girl having a real spunk, like your dad." I wondered if her friends were training Annette towards such an odd behavior, unacceptable as far as one could detect, but hoped I was wrong. They looked like multicolored peacocks, with their unfashionable makeup and body piercings, as they were seemingly following a punk culture. Whenever they saw me on the road or by the shops, some of them used to shout at me, "Hello, spunk!" I did not feel comfortable with that. Sometimes even Birgit gossiped about her friends, talking all about their thoughts of her dad being a spunk. I have never seen myself as such, nor tried to appear that way. That was very unusual. Birgit once told me how her mother described me. "Mom thinks you make yourself look always so handsome, just so that all those girls would think of you as a spunk." That expression was so childish, and I thought Birgit was making it up. I remember how Magda used to complain about my appearance from time to time, advising me that I should act my age without being like a teenager, making myself look younger and behaving more youthful than my real age. But I always looked after myself, always endeavoring to look and feel my best. Obviously, it was seen as something wrong on my part, as with everything else I stood for, and everything I did. I was apparently always false, a pretender, and wrongdoer, just like the witnesses considered me, and as they still do. One weekend, feeling utterly exhausted after a very tiring week, and the usual household chores, I decided to sleep a little longer in the morning, and regretted it totally because an unexpected and extremely devastating event took place. I was so shocked and find it very difficult to explain, even after all these years. Although they say time heals everything, I feel it is not quite healed, as I still feel the pain. I suddenly jumped in shock when I felt very heavy breathing on my face upon waking up from my short-lived slumber. As usual, my sleep was very light, and I would almost immediately wake up if I felt the slightest waft of wind upon my face, or a tiny click in the room. I certainly did not expect something like this as I opened my eyes. I saw my daughter Annette's face right in front of me. First of all, I never felt comfortable sleeping with anybody, especially when unexpected and uninvited, because of my health-related problems, and the warmth of another person was not welcome. When they were very young, the children sometimes wanted to come to bed to wake us parents up, and if they had nightmares or discomfort, they usually preferred to sleep with their mother. But when one's daughter slips into one's bed after a certain age, it is extremely unusual. Discovering her completely naked body in my bed was highly inappropriate, and was an absolutely uninvited and unwanted intrusion. She was my daughter. I am certain she knew that I would not countenance such behavior. Before going into any further details, I feel it is important to analytically clarify a few realities. What is considered herein is an absolute truth statement, which can be testified to under all circumstances. My life so far has been like a science fantasy, with all my creative imagination, dreams, and personal experiences. However, they are within my reality and true to my conscious mind, although they may be just empty nothings for the extremely biased. Ideally, it would be far better to accept them as my truth, respecting my viewpoints as I respect everyone else's, no matter how they are perceived. My daughter's dreams may also appear truthful and real to them. However, one needs to consider how they have been manipulated to see only the ugly and ungainly elements surrounding me by those who could do naught else other than hate me, for that is their love, punishing me due to my non-compliance with their bidding. Unfortunately, the poor girls were so blinded that every ugly deed they imagined appeared real within their negatively reformed minds. Their associations in their teens amplified the images they believed they were seeing incorporated within my persona, like, for example, both claiming to have seen a skull with blood gushing out its eye sockets behind me, when such never existed. The absolute truth is that long after when Birgit informed me about her sister's experience, which I had been accused of, it became clear, for I honestly did not know what my sin was until then. And this was apparently the hidden wickedness I seemingly conducted myself in, as per her important plan, under instruction from a low-grade source. Her uninvited entry into my room was obviously to create a believable scenario which she ultimately wanted to use against me and conduct her ungainly game. She was thoroughly influenced and well coached to see only absolute evil in me, further coloring her experience in her creative imagination. But as soon as she woke me up, I raised my voice telling her to stop. get out immediately and wash yourself." She was in shock. I am absolutely certain that she remembers that moment of shock. She did not get what she wanted and was obviously terribly disappointed, shouting at me with names I never expected from her. "I knew you were a pufta. Fucking bastard. Fucking asshole." It really shattered me. A single man, totally exhausted, sleeping with his dreams. I did not perform what she hoped for. I also had my own health issues to contend with and told her off. This is the reality, and I am not going to apologize for it. This statement is not a blame game by any means or any attempt to change the color and character of any event, nor camouflage an ungainly action. In fact, it is purely to indicate how certain things unfolded in actuality. I know that I have been considered a wicked, heartless man nobody could trust by all my children under their dear mother's deliberate activities for years, painted me as a liar, unbelievable, and unreliable person, because I did not fulfill her dreamt of criteria as her husband, for she apparently feared Jehovah. Even today she keeps painting me, through her daughters, as the greatest evil in the world, after creating the effective groundwork to hate me, because she never knew how to love. The saddest part is that she considers it as the righteousness of her God. But the real evil has been no other than the Jehovah's Witnesses who shunned me, encouraging her to break me down completely by her deeds, which she could not even understand, yet believed it to be God's righteous will. Let me remind you of her philosophy. When someone tells me untruths as true, and I preach it as the truth, you cannot blame me for telling the untruth. Remember that children's young minds are easily adaptive to fantasizing things which are non-existent, yet appearing as their reality. This is of great concern with children belonging to families who adhere to cultist ideals. You can literally tell a child that she is going to see a fairy princess or goblin when in the forest after encountering the big oak tree on the right-hand side of the narrow path, and the child would experience it in the minutest detail with a few additions to her fantasies. This is how boys in particular are keen to play or fight to win when engaged in sports or war games, which can later be remembered in detail as one's childhood memories with additional elements which were not there initially, thus creating false memories. Some young adults are similarly influenced by those believed to be from higher standing backgrounds. The young do not seem to consider their lack of knowledge, for they are trained to believe everything expressed in religious fervor to be the reality. This is how so many radicalization stories we hear, which end with tragic consequences in our times, are conducted. However, after my disfellowshipment, I was no longer willing to associate with the real evildoers. Therefore I followed the great advice in Proverbs 24, verse 1, where it is written, "Be not thou envious against evil men, neither desire to be with them." Likewise, the young are influenced and programmed to see the whole world, let alone people, in similar vein, as we have observed over the years. Fanatical parents and their elders' artwork therefore manifests even after many years of indoctrination, as can be evidenced with Jehovah's Witnesses. I have no doubt in my mind that Annette was under the manipulative and negative influence of a cult, eager to make me appear as a social misfit who would perform evil deeds which they themselves were engaged in through their dedication to concepts which are not factual. My daughter's behavior is direct proof. Hypnotic programming undeniably exists and is an evidenced reality in the world. Many cults and radical religions make use of it to suit their ends. This is also how radicalizations can be successfully fostered. During the Third Reich and times of the former Soviet Socialist Republican system, it was in wide use. Through hypnosis, sporting events can be made successful, and political parties benefit from the indirect application thereof. The constant propagandist repetitious execution of indirect mind control techniques in advertising yields positive results, as can be seen with certain food items in cinema or television commercials. Jehovah's Witnesses use similar techniques when preaching or keeping their members at bay. Through hypnosis, the pain the patients are likely to suffer after surgery can be reduced or eliminated. Multiple languages and their accents can be learned using the same method. Similarly, criminal activities under devotional fervor can be conducted as witnessed in worldwide news streaming through our social communication systems. In the hands of the unscrupulous, the most vulnerable in society can be led to do the unthinkable. Now consider what my daughters were continually subjected to. Every time they heard my name, they would only see evil in me due to the constant hammering of hypnotic and repeated suggestions under the banner of righteousness of God, which the innocent and young minds of children would readily accept. Those people of supposed righteousness, based in country Victoria, who discovered my unwillingness to contribute to their way of living, could only conduct such a hypnotic session as a quick and lazy way out to punish me through my daughter programming her to do their dirty deeds upon remembering how to react to their pre-programmed stimuli and attempt to do things contrary to my principles. I honestly believe this to be the case, for after all she had the groundwork from her previous education by her righteous mother and the witnesses of alleged supreme wisdom. For me it was a time of suffering from inflammation in the bladder area and feeling worried about it while enduring mild and sometimes very strong pains in my groin. My left hand being squeezed was a devastating shock and very unpleasant. I jumped immediately, feeling dirty and threatened. I even found it very difficult to touch Magda's body before our marriage. Maybe I was influenced by her parents' demands that I should have no intimate closeness to her, as it was a great sin. When with my friends of the opposite gender, I felt very shy, but eventually learned about the intricacies of life during my early to late teens. However, I have never enjoyed uninvited advances from others in the past. This incident with my daughter was the greatest shock I wished had never happened. I shouted at her, in shock and horror. I did not know how long she had been in my bed, but felt it could not have been more than a few seconds, or only a minute or two. I also knew that my unexpected response could leave a lasting impression upon her emotional self, and that was something I never desired. In those days, I used to dream colorful, creative things, and I am sure that I was dreaming something even then, but could not remember what it was this time, as I suddenly woke up into another nightmare. This was probably what she had been advised to engage in order to accuse me with the unacceptable and unthinkable. I had never experienced anything like that before, and did not know what to make of it, and how else to react. In that state, I kept loudly telling her to get out immediately and wash herself quickly. My sleep broken, by this uninvited event as soon as I started to drift into a much-needed sleep was too much to endure. I wondered what had come over her to attempt something like this. Why was she trying to make me feel awful? Why did she get into my bed? It was then I understood what she meant when she said she could easily have me put behind bars. I knew she hated me so much, but to this degree I could not imagine. I was so disillusioned, feeling filthy and shattered. The truth is that she was not even looking at what she was attempting in that moment of undesirable moments. Her eyes fixed only on mine. Can one imagine what she was seeing in her imaginative mind? When I stopped her, she was evidently in shock. Did she forget that she was my daughter and I was her father? Why had she targeted me like that? Was she under the dreaded effect of hallucinogens? As far as I was concerned, it was extremely inappropriate for any teen, an older person, to be engaged intimately, and I certainly did not belong to those practicing a 7th century religion where they married their very young daughters to much older men. Was she following her friend's advice? Was it her mother encouraging her to punish me, ultimately, because of what I stood for? Was it the hypnotic programming she was subjected to before? Engaging in something like this has never been my interest, and I could categorically not accept such accusation forced upon my morality. On the other hand, she always maintained that I was not her real parent, and had only adopted her. Repeating myself, I truly did not know what to make of the situation anymore. I honestly thought I was having a nightmare from which I wanted to wake up. I kept worrying and was utterly stressed out. I hoped that this experience was not going to have an adverse effect on her future life, and she would not become a woman who hated men. It left me shattered. As mentioned, when she left my room shouting, "You bastard! You fucking bastard! You bloody pufter! You bastard! I hate you! I hate you! I always hated you! I knew you were a pufter anyway!" She was crying in disappointment and shock, for she could not have her way. Those words she afforded hurt me, and I could not utter a word or a sigh, but I can never forget them. On one side, dealing with my own health and emotions, and on the other, having to put up with something like this was just too much. Never believing in committing what was expected of me in that ugly moment almost destroyed me. I could not accept uninvited intrusions like that. For a time, my breathing was also affected. It felt as if I was having a heart attack. In fact, if I had died in that instant, perhaps I would feel happier. I am certain that this was what she truly wanted anyway. How dare anyone even contemplate something unacceptable like this? Obviously, she had no respect for me. I knew she was practicing what she attempted to do that morning with her multiple boyfriends for a long time now. Did she perhaps want to feel how her mother felt? I honestly never expected this from her. A few hours later she behaved as if nothing had happened, but I took it like a nightmare of the darkest kind, and was happy to have woken up from it. But just as I said earlier, what had happened could not easily be forgotten, no matter how embarrassing and ugly it was. This was a memory I wanted to wipe off, if I could, but in all honesty, did not have the courage to talk about it. At this point in time, I could see where our future was going to take us. I thoroughly regretted having my daughters in my care. I was their father and their carer, not their lover. This was so completely alien and unacceptable to me. I remember a long while later one of my lady friends asking me point blank how I would feel about young girls, including my daughters, for men apparently generally felt flattered and happy to engage in loving them closely. What kind of loving did she really consider? I questioned her why she was inquiring something like that. Was it because I reminded her of someone who was unusually close to her? Such a question left a very bitter taste in my mouth. Maybe I originated from a very backward culture and was not as sophisticated like the people I encountered. As far as I was concerned, others had to accept me as I accepted them. Some of the trends of other cultures were not welcome in my upbringing. Was she testing me? Nor could I understand why Birgit was giggling in the background. Was she shocked? Did she understand what was happening? I cried for days, and only Birgit came to me once, asking how I felt, and stopped me from an unthought of disaster, because my thoughts were not clear, as I was contemplating suicide. On the other hand, who would benefit from my demise? Probably Jehovah's Witnesses and their faithful servant Magda would triumph over such a disaster, for their God Jehovah was righteous. However, I am glad I did not, for otherwise I would not be here to tell you my story. I was relieved that nothing more serious had happened, like the sad stories we hear from time to time. I never wanted to add to the misery of the world. Whether I am believed or not, for I know that males are usually considered unreliable, it is of no consequence or tragedy for me. I can only tell you my side of the story and not lies, as I do not follow any of the religious ideologies. I do not follow darkness. I was both father and mother to my daughters, but never took advantage of their innocence. I would also never demand or expect them to part from their pocket money to pay me for anything. It is true that I have taken many photographs of them, but not to show to a number of old men, as at least one of them has accused me of doing. I have never produced porn material promoting my daughters and exploiting their youth, let alone their childhood, but as I discovered later, I was portrayed as doing just that. This denigration was based on absolutely sinister and evil insinuation against my person, born of hatred. I have a very clear conscience concerning this issue, for I have never neglected them, as they falsely claimed, and there are many witnesses to vouch for the fact that I have never used their vulnerability for my fantasies, as some Jehovah's Witnesses apparently spoke about without having any knowledge of me, only surmising that I must be one of those evildoers, mainly for being disfellowshipped for my grave sins against their teachings. If I was such a bad parent, and Magda knew it in absolute terms, as she claimed she did, why did she leave them with me in the first place when she left, and never cared for their personal concerns when they needed their mother's input regarding a number of important issues relating to their growth into womanhood? When considering what happened, I started to analyze the situation in a non-biased way. In the study of psychology, we have been informed about the differences between the male and female characteristics of humanity. Therein, we discover the theories of a number of prominent psychologists in regard to the developmental paths children follow as they mature. For a young girl child, the very first experience of discovering a male person's role in the family is her father. At first, some of those theories may sound as if they are promoting children's sexual experiences, but when further considered, they show how a child relates to her father. She discovers that males have a certain role to play in the family, apart from being a responsible bread earner. But also her mother's relationship with that male person is discovered. he becomes an important role model within the psyche of the child. However, for someone's daughter experiencing jealousies and hoping to take her mother's place would be considered a disorder, although in some cultures originating from the 7th century, it may be completely normal. Boys relate to their fathers differently. However, their view of the mother's role in the family is similarly very important. And let us not forget that a boy's best friend remains his mother. A boy feels responsible for the first female in his life and discovers that she has a special bond with his father. The next stage follows when both girls and boys start observing and discovering their own sexuality, the tendencies of which are the natural direction to follow. At this time, they begin to discover all about their brothers and sisters, but normally no incestuous system is followed. Later they open up to the world, exterior to their family life, and start discovering more roles which the opposite genders play. Sometimes, as one discovers, they like to imitate the opposite gender, depending on life circumstances they are subjected to on their developmental path. They are now making comparisons reasonably accurately. This period of their life is critical, and it is important to show them the rights and wrongs in the society they are part of, with all its traditional, ethical, and racial values. Religion may also play a great role in building the fundamental qualities of personality. But religious training can also be a curse when it takes away all freedoms from children's lives. I knew in absolute certainty that my children never had the chance to develop normally, for they had not been given an opportunity to learn and discover due to being subjected only to severe restrictions under the banner of Jehovah's Witness morality. I believe my daughters were inflicted with false assumptions that it was normal for them to desire to get to know the father, their first male role model in their lives, intimately by physical closeness. I also believe that they were under the influence of their school friends who came from families where such a taboo subject was secretly conducted. In certain societies, in the ancient past, incest was a hidden practice and always swept under the carpet. In my youth, I was taught that both genders had their own place within the family circle, and sexuality between close relatives was never considered as normal. However, discovering our own sexuality with the opposite gender within the society we are part of is a very natural factor of our lives. But, alas, we hear many stories which are rightfully considered as being socially inappropriate. Certain forms of religious intolerance exist within groups of people we are surrounded with, and yet those belief systems seem to control moral fabric of family units. Some of my school friends were from that background, and very cautious not to offend a great God, so that they would not be punished in the afterlife with eternal damnation. But behind the curtains, who knows what was really happening with the young? As years go by, we discover so many stories of abuse, making us shiver about the state of humanity. Maybe humans are still following their God's first command of multiplying and populating the earth, according to religious dogma. In other words, they are probably still committing incest as believers in creation, the way they have been taught through the centuries. Remember, according to scriptural wisdom, in the beginning there was just Adam and Eve, and their subsequent children. However, throughout the years we have also discovered that to have good morals we do not need any religion or our Lord God to worship. Good morals and character must first be born within every individual. Upon further observation and study, many of the unwanted and undesirable actions of humans have been discovered among the so-called faithful. Over the years, I heard many stories about sexual abuse of children within Jehovah's Witness congregations. Yet nobody dared to speak up, for nothing was reported to the authorities, and everything was swept under the carpet. There was also the fear factor, in which everyone complaining about those ungainly actions from faithful brothers would promptly be disfellowshipped. Oddly, we discover that only the victims are disfellowshipped. However, so-called godless people, who apparently commit serious crimes, according to Jehovah's Witnesses, just like in the Dark Ages, are actually morally sound. An atheist's moral code is stronger than most faithful believers in God. Almost all wars have been blessed by religion. An atheist thinks, while an alleged believer in a supreme deity relies on what others think.